Christian, thank you for joining me on the podcast today.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm very good. I'm very good. I think I saw your post on LinkedIn a couple of months ago, and I've got it written down here. Part of it said, "You're not going to see me on a podcast anytime soon." So I
Took that
think
as a
it was,
challenge, didn't you?
I did. I saw that as a challenge. To be fair, though, I called you up about it, and you didn't take too much persuading, which I was pleasantly surprised about. But it's wonderful to have you on.
What can I say? I'll never seek these things out, but it's always good to chat D2C. It is always good to chat marketing.
Absolutely, absolutely, and especially with your background. I mean, looking here, Frive CMO, AG1 VP UK, Gousto, Harry's marketing director. It's a bit of a who's who of D2C subscription by the looks of it.
Yeah, there's quite a few there. And even before that, everything was always subscription led. I did about 10 years in the charity sector where they built the entire sector on direct debits 30 years ago. And it's really funny seeing what you can translate from the charity sector to breakdown cover and then into the D2C world. It's like we were saying earlier on, like there's this debate in D2C about transferable experience versus non-transferable, and actually, like subscription is a knotty beast, and it
Mhm.
definitely has mechanics you need to understand. But direct to consumer is, I don't know. I feel like there's quite a few brands that have D2C in some lens or some way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, look, we're going to focus this conversation around when performance marketing stops working, because you've covered at the level that you are, sort of both sides of the spectrum, performance and brand marketing. I guess from your perspective, and as we know, right, most D2C brands start with performance marketing, but at some point it stops working as effectively. From your experience working within these eclectic sort of D2C subscription businesses, when does that moment usually happen?
It really varies. I mean, it just varies so much. Usually there's a trigger point. Quite often it could be a competitor enters the market. You saw that with Harry's, with Dollar Shave Club, for
Hmm.
instance. Obviously, the competitor environment for Frive has massively picked up. AG1, similar. Everyone's been hearing the news about the Groom success story recently as the competitor pool gets busier and busier because of possibly inspired by your example. Things can start to decline as there's just more competitors for every single click, every single bid. It could be when you've picked up all your early adopters. It could depend on the size of your TAM. It could be a change to your pricing, to your LTV mechanics, or to your
Hmm.
allowable CPAs. So it really varies, but I guess for me, like the when is less important than actually monitoring that moment. And I feel like you need to go into every single fresh week, month with your eyes wide open. Understand your incrementality by channel, your overall incrementality week on week, month on month, year on year. So you understand what that growth is costing you on an incremental basis, not just an average, because that's where a lot of people fall down.
What do you think, I guess, in your experience, what do you think the early signs are that a brand is becoming too reliant on paid channels?
Um, I think. It's not necessarily a paid organic thing because, again, you look at the success stories out of the US, you look at AG1 and Groons, they were
Hmm.
built on paid. I think we almost need to break this myth that paid equals performance marketing and brand
Hmm.
equals unpaid and organic because it's just not true. Partnerships, you can do some great reciprocal partnerships, which could be great from a performance marketing perspective at a £0 CPA, but aren't doing anything for your brand. And at the same time, I feel like it's one of the big myths out there that brand is just organic content or just your partnerships. Because actually, if you're going to build brand in a really structured, long-term way, it's going to cost you money. And I think there's too many companies out there that are scared of that fact. Um, but I think the key thing is you have to understand at what point your allowable incrementals aren't adding up to what you want them to add up to. And you can see that coming.
And I absolutely take your point. I think obviously there's been a lot said about brand, and I think perhaps it's some of the powers that be, CFOs, CEOs, who perhaps don't see the return as quickly as they do in paid channels, and therefore are reluctant to put that money into brand. You're part of one of our sort of community groups here, CMO and Marketing Director Forum, and I think I've spoken to a number of your peers over the years that one of their frustrations is trying to wean themselves away from that sort of Google and Meta drug, which I think a lot of them are still trying to do. What I mean, why do you think so many brands struggle to break out of that?
I feel like we're very good in marketing at finding things to do. So the next step out of Google and Meta tends to become what's the next channel I can layer on, what's the next channel that I can layer on, and what's the next channel I can layer on. And to an extent, that works. You can get incremental performance out of your TikToks, your YouTubes, but only to a point. And actually, I feel like one of the big things that I've learned, Chris at AG1, the founder, was obsessed with is really relentless focus on fewer things.
Mhm.
Obviously the AG1 story is one of one product, one channel for 10 years straight to £1 billion valuation. He very much took that to the extreme. But I do think there's no point just dabbling around the edges. It's far more important to go, what are the next big bets that you make and having the confidence to face reality and take those big steps as opposed to the smaller incremental ones.
So give me an example then, in terms of your experience, Christian, where you've worked for one of these DTC subscription brands where kind of performance has got you to a point and you know you needed to make that transition.
Mm,
How did you do it? What was the scenario?
sure. AG1 is a great example. We had the proud pleasure in the UK of running their first ever integrated brand campaign. They'd run a lot of different pieces of activity in the US before, but because the velocity was so huge and because it was so performance marketing driven, they hadn't really had a chance to stop and run a fully integrated campaign across all of their paid and organic touch points. And that's what we managed to achieve on a absolute shoestring of a budget a couple of years ago. And I think all the signs were there. As I was saying earlier on, we were seeing our incremental CPAs getting higher and higher and higher. We were looking at our audience and realizing that our biggest barrier to growth was brand awareness. And I think the other challenge AG1 have across the board, but especially in the UK, is price point. It's a premium product, right? And as a premium product, brand and your brand associations are really, really important. So we ran a really nice little campaign in London. Wasn't hugely expensive, to be honest. I think it came in at about £1 million, but just seeing the growth that we saw in our brand awareness numbers unlocked a really successful January a few months later. And what was really interesting to see is because you always get competitive in international business, is seeing the
Mhm.
UK performance versus the other regions, and seeing the impact of what that campaign did just a couple of months later as we entered our high season.
I think you've got some really interesting insight from that sort of UK US perspective as well, right? Because I think in the last couple of years, there's a lot of D2C brands in the UK have been trying to go out and attack the US market. And we can understand why. And I think one of our other community groups, we got together a couple of years ago or 18 months ago in London, I think, and had a conversation about taking that D2C brand to the US market. So I think a lot of that has been covered around sort of treat it as individual countries, states, opposed to treating it just as one country.
That's just
But
the demographics are all so different, aren't they?
yeah, absolutely. But I think what I'm curious to hear from you is for those I've seen a few US D2C brands now coming to the UK market. I think we've got Skims is doing some stuff right at the
Mm,
minute. I think Our Place has been here for a little while. I think Ridge, the
yeah,
wallets, they're
right.
coming
Yeah.
doing a bit more. What would be your advice for those US D2C brands that are coming to the UK? How is it different?
I think the key thing is understanding, first off, demographics, and secondly is how we perceive brands. I did some really fun work in across both Harry's and AG1, looking at the differences between the US market, the UK market, and the German market. One of my favorite stats which I'm going to repeat because I think we got cut off earlier on, is that if you take London out of the UK economy, our economy is smaller than either Romania or Mississippi, which means that we're all fighting, all of these great D2C brands out there are fighting over the same 10, 20 million people. And so as a result, you've got a load of people out there that aren't seeing much from us at all, and some of us who are seeing absolutely every single brand out there. So what that means is a real change to your marketing approach. So first off, like the paid organic dynamic is totally different because in the UK, in the US, you've got a billion TV channels. Broadcast PR is still possible. You've got a billion local newspapers and websites. Organic PR is, still really you can really weaponize it. In the UK, you've got a lot of media holders that are very good at monetizing the value that they bring. And
Mhm.
so actually organic doesn't take you as far in the UK as it does in the US. Um, at the same time, that means that paid actually is, I'd argue, more important in the UK market than it is in the US market because you have to reach only a certain proportion of people. And then if you look at Germany, it's kind of halfway in between the two. But the other thing is you have some really different demographics. The population is a lot older. They are, as a population, they have far more subscription aversion. And so you need to understand how to build trust in different environments. So I think the main thing is understanding who it is you're talking to, how you're going to reach those people, how you're going to have to position. It's your marketing fundamentals, but you almost have to start from scratch rather than taking it for granted and just translating over.
Nice. I love that though. It's we always I guess just because I'm in the UK and obviously talk to a lot of UK D2Cs over the years, we always look at it from how do we approach the US? But I love that there. It's if there are
Yeah.
any US D2C brands that end up listening to this, it's if you come into the UK, just think about it like
Yeah.
if you would be approaching Mississippi.
This is exactly it, and I think it's also understanding the wider context. Like AG1 is a great example here because if you look at supplements in the US, it's a huge market, and it's a huge market for a lot of reasons. But the analogy that I always used was if you are paying thousands of dollars a month every month for insurance, and private healthcare is the dominant system, and if you have a heart attack, it's going to cost you tens of thousands of dollars. You've got a vested interest in proactive healthcare and
Mhm.
preventative medicine. In the UK, we have the NHS, it's great, but you know that if something goes wrong, you've got someone to pick you up. At the same time, you've got a really strong white labeling culture in Europe, which means that you can get a one a day multivitamin in Tesco's for, I don't know, 7p a day or something like that. I remember looking at the equivalent in Target in the US, and prices were about 7 times as high. And so actually, you've got a stronger white label market. You've got less reason for people to take supplements. You've got far greater access to, fresh vegetables and, affordable food in the UK. So actually, like, they're not the same market. And it's those nuances you have to understand when you build out, okay, so specifically, who am I looking for? And specifically, why will they care? Because it's not going to be the same people. It's never going to be the same people.
No, absolutely. I just wanted to bring it back to that focus around brand for the moment in terms of okay, a D2C brand, we've done amazingly well focusing on paid search, paid social, as many of them do, but it's time to sort of make that transition and sort of broaden the playbook out. We want to improve brand, but brand marketing, I mean, you can't just do brand marketing, right? It's TV, it's billboards,
Mm.
it's radio. I mean, which particular are there particular platforms or channels within brand marketing that you've seen work better for D2C brands that are sort of just making that switch for the first time or earlier?
Oh, good question. I mean, the short answer is yes, and the longer answer is I don't want to act like there's just a playbook, one size fits all, because there isn't.
Well, how do you know? How
I've
do you
def-
work out
yeah,
which one's best?
I mean, the short answer, I've definitely seen a lot of UK brands jump on out of home as their first paid brand exposure.
Yeah.
I love out of home. I think it's a fantastic channel. But for D2C brands, it's you don't have a huge amount of time to get your message across. You've got 2 seconds at best. And that means for brands entering retail for the first time, out of home is a fantastic channel because they get a brand association from you immediately. They see it in store. They're in store. They've got time to investigate. I love it's a very different brand. I love McDonald's out of home because they use it so expertly at all levels of the funnel, really, really performance driven, really, really brand driven. But for a D2C brand where you've got a proposition to explain and also usually on subscription, which means you need a certain level of trust to get to that point, 2 seconds usually isn't enough, except as a supplementary channel. So I've usually found anything video related, whether that's YouTube, direct response TV, brand TV, far more effective just because you've got more time to tell your story and give people reasons. Um, but with that said, I think, again, the main thing for you to do as a brand, if you want to move into brand marketing, is channel is almost secondary. You almost need to start off with your P&L and go, how are we affording this? Because I think what I've seen a lot of is brands starting and stopping. Like, we're going to
Mhm.
do a campaign, see if it works. It doesn't work, great. And I think what people don't realize is if I go out and do a Google non-brand campaign, there's only so right that can go. There's only so wrong that can go. I'm being really flippant. I do appreciate this, but it's like the range of possibilities is only so broad. For brand campaigns, for a single brand, I've seen ROIs on a brand campaign of 0.13 all the way up to 3, 4. And this is the same brand selling the same product, and you're talking multiple millions of pounds. There's just a broader range of possibilities. And if you do one campaign and then go, oh, brand marketing doesn't work, let's do something else, you've missed the point. Like, if you're investing in your brand, you have to do it slowly and consistently over a period of time. There's been loads of studies done that show exactly what happens when you go dark and your brand awareness declining, or even if you pull down spend and your brand awareness declining. So it makes it really, really inefficient if you go, we're going to go really big. Oh, wait, we're not. So I think it's really important to have that steady brand growth and a long-term strategy to do it.
What's your experience, Christian, been like of selling that in internally? Because I can imagine there's probably a few that listening who perhaps in a D2C that are at this stage or had this situation and they're just not getting buy-in
Mm.
from the powers that be. How do you sell brand marketing as that sort of we need to do it for the longer term?
I think the key thing is you and the person you're speaking to, whether it's CEO, CFO, want the same thing. And what you want does lie in the P&L they're looking at. And I think far too often when it comes to brand marketing, we get sucked into a world of marketing KPIs and soft metrics, which I know unequivocally my CFO will not give a shit about. Like, my brand awareness is up 10%. Great. Where's the money? And I think when I've seen brand marketing work really, really well, you can see it in a P&L. You can see it measured commercially in your econometrics. You can see to the number what it's doing on the acquisition side of your P&L, on the retention side of your P&L, on the short term and the long term. So this shouldn't be a soft metrics over here and hard numbers over here debate because you're going to lose 10 times out of 10. Of course, you need to measure it in a different way and over a longer period of time. And there is also obviously that leap of faith to start with. But actually, the goal should be to get to a point where you can measure your brand campaigns versus your performance marketing campaigns and understand what they're doing. And I've seen this, Gusto's econometrics. I used to, I ran Gusto's econometrics whilst I was there, and channels that you wouldn't expect to be able to put a concrete effect against, you could see PR was incredible whilst I was at Gusto. You could see the number of signups that it was driving. And I think once you start taking that attitude to your brand marketing of we're here to make money rather than we're here to drive a brand awareness, it's far easier to translate into conversations.
Are there any particular sort of D2C brands that you admire or have admired in the last sort of more recently in the last year or so that you look at and go, yeah, you're doing it right?
Oh, good question. I mean, Purdy and Fig always stand out as someone who's just following a very sensible playbook. They're not. I don't see any. big wacky activations from Plenty and Fig. Maybe they're doing them. Maybe I'm just not cool enough to use their products. But the steps they're taking all seem incredibly logical. The step towards some of their TV work has been really great. Um, the guys that run that 7 Days, I think they're called, the agency, they've done a really great job on some creative, making it have an emotional response on a very small budget. Um, and again, they're a company that's going to really easily be able to look to multiple lenses for growth. D2C, retail, I don't know if they're there yet, but either now or in the future, even their products make sense internationally. But the reason they're going to be able to do that is because I'll be very, very surprised if their CFO and their CMO aren't joined very, very closely at the hip in terms of what their marketing is doing. Because they're doing things that, you know, they're not doing shiny shit. They're doing boring stuff really, really well that's going to make them money.
Yeah, nice. You bring up a point that I wanted to raise with you as well, because I know we've talked about sort of just linear going from performance straight into brand, but there's obviously other things that could be decided that perhaps brand isn't the play. Maybe it is, like you just said there, going international, or as we've seen with a lot of pure play D2C brands, moving into retail and becoming more
Yeah.
omni-channel. How, in your experience, how have you sort of decided which is best to invest in?
It's a great question. And I think it does come back to that point of, brand being an investment, not a immediate, it's going to make you money. And so you've got these different options on the table. Um, it's always going to vary business to business based on a number of different things. International gives you such huge potential upside. And again, you've seen that in the Groons valuation, you've seen that in the recent Huel valuation. But at the same time, the logistics are a nightmare. And I'm not a logistics guy, but you have to start thinking, how do I ship my product? Where can I make my product? How long can my product last, etc. All of these boring bits that, I will never be the person to solve those problems. On the retail side of things, obviously, it can get you some really consistent revenue and also support your brand. But at the same time, if you don't get your brand awareness to a certain level before getting there, it's going to be very, very easy to fail. You usually need brand awareness to get there because otherwise you're going to end up falling into a discounting trap and a discounting loop. And you have to have a product that fits because obviously retailer margins are a thing. And if your margins and your business aren't strong enough to support a retail P&L, you're going nowhere fast. And then on the brand side of things, as we were saying earlier on, there's a cost attached to it. It does take time. And I think it also depends on how niche is your product. Because if you're mass, you can use mass channels, which means your efficiency will probably be slightly better, but your actual costs of running campaigns like that are going to be a lot larger. Whereas if you're more niche, you're probably going to be less efficient because you're going to be paying higher CPMs to target more tightly. But at the same time, you probably won't have to spend as much to reach your TAM if you've only got a tiny TAM.
Mm.
So I'm chucking you a lot of hypotheticals, but I think you really have to dig into what are we trying to achieve and what is the best route forward.
I mean, I know most D2Cs won't look at that brand going international, moving into retail and go, we're only picking one of them. I mean, that over time, they're most likely going to want to try and do all of them at some stage. And
Yeah.
I get what you said earlier about, look, this isn't a playbook, and I think it probably is quite business dependent. But I mean, in your view, is there a right order to those moves, or does it really depend on the individual business?
I don't think there's necessarily a right order. I think the biggest thing for me that I've seen is whether it's international or retail or brand, all three of these things, you're talking 3 to 5 year plays, which means because it's the future, there's always the temptation to go, well, we won't start that right now because it's the future. And it does feel like actually the way these things work is the opposite. Like the sooner you start, the sooner you're going to get to a point where that's a meaningful part of your P&L. And if you leave it too late, then you get to the point of crap, we need growth now, but you haven't laid that groundwork. Again, AG1, they did such a fantastic job. That is not, they've only got one product, but it's not a simple supply chain. It's, 80 different ingredients, a shed load of countries. The supply chain team there are incredible. But what they did really well from quite surprisingly earlier on in their history is they set up like fully internationally, shipping to Australia and the UK and Germany and Canada and God knows how many they're at now. I think it's 20, 30, 40. And that meant when some of their big US-based partnerships popped off, the famous ones with Joe Rogan and Andrew Huberman, they weren't just getting a US impact. They were getting, I won't say free signups, but they were getting signups around the world from people listening to those shows that if they weren't set up to deliver, they wouldn't have got. So just by having the surface area there, they just managed to increase the efficiency of their marketing massively. So I think it goes to show that the earlier you can get these foundations in place, the earlier you've got something to build.
Obviously, you're at AG1, and part of that sort of coming into the UK market. I mean, they're a bit of a poster child, right? When it comes to D2C. But that green space supplements, but greens, I mean, has exploded during the time that they've been around.
Mm.
How do you think they continue to stay relevant over the coming years?
Great question. And it's tricky. But I think what they've done really well, and you can start to see this from some of the stuff in the US, is they've recognized the need for a shift. They were one product, one channel for so many years, and now it looks like they're really successfully going out towards retail. They brought out AGZ and they're starting to expand sideways. So again, if we tick off those big things, they are really starting to expand into different product lenses and different channels to just sort of help them grow in other dimensions. It's going to be tricky because we were saying it earlier on, as the space gets more crowded, you've got everything gets more expensive, and you need the opportunity to find other ways to win. But I think they've got some really great people there, and yeah, I've got no doubt they'll work it out.
No, definitely, definitely. Well, I can see I've seen a lot in that supplement space anyway. Everyone seems to be moving or bringing out a line of gummies at the minute. Ever since
Yeah,
that grunge
yeah,
deal, I think
greens, yeah.
gummies are going are coming forward. But look, I wanted to finish up and look. This has been really insightful, Christian. I think there's a lot of value in here. Had a couple of quick questions for you before we go. If you had to give one rule for scaling a D2C brand beyond performance marketing, what would it be?
Oh, um, I won't just steal Chris's one. I love that relentless focus. I love everyone in your business should know what their top one priority is and their top three priorities are. Um, I think the other one that I've learned recently and I've really been reflecting on is understanding pace and understanding the right pace for the right set of decisions. There are decisions that you are going to need to take and KPIs you need to measure every single week. And if you don't measure those things every single week, you're going to have problems. But there are other things where if you try and measure them too quickly or measure the result of them too quickly, you're going to fall into a totally different set of problems. Stuff like your CRO testing. If you don't get statistical significance, you might as well not have done it. And however tempting it is to rush things, you've got to leave things time to mature. And other decisions, as we were saying earlier on, if you are a brand that has decided the best move for you is brand marketing or retail or international, and you do it for 3 weeks and it doesn't work and you change your mind, then you've kind of missed the point. And you need to understand how long are we committing to and how are we going to measure benchmarks short, mid, and long term to get to where we want to know, get to where we want to go. Because just because it's not working right this very second doesn't mean it's not the right bet.
Mhm.
So making sure you attach the right pace to the right set of decisions, really important.
Okay, nice. Now, final question before I let you go. And this one, I wanted to ask this one because I want to see if I can conjure up a few comments in the in on YouTube here. Maybe be a little bit edgy. What's one belief that you have about D2C growth that most people would disagree with?
Oh, so this, I was really racking my brains on this question and I was struggling slightly. Got two little ones for you. Number one is I think there's something fascinating where I find some sectors, the more boring the product is, the better the marketing is. And I feel like if you've got a really cool product, you need to question why that is. I love Compare the Market, confused.com. Again, it's the most boring as sim product, which means your marketing has to be on point and
Hmm.
your brand characters come through and your jingles come through. And I feel like when you've got a really great product, sometimes those things are a bit less tempting or a little bit less persuasive because you feel like you've got so much else to talk about, but it's not a reason to go away from the golden rules. I think the other thing that's quite interesting is, from my experience, there is such a virtuous circle between how good a company is at fundraising versus how good they are at DTC growth. If you look at, both Gousto and Harry's, two companies I worked for, they were excellent at fundraising. And what that meant was, if you look at what they built internally in terms of tech, in terms of back end, in terms of operations, in terms of logistics, it's incredible. And you do the work once, you do it really well, you move on. And so it becomes a real virtuous circle. Whereas I think brands that struggle more on the fundraising side or to make that case to investors, what that therefore means they've got slightly less money. It therefore means that they have to build things on the cheap. Therefore means they have to do work multiple times. They have to make more short-term decisions. And so you get into a vicious circle. So I think there's something really interesting in that balance between fundraising success and D2C success.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, look, Christian, I know I started on this saying that I saw your post a month or two ago saying you're not going to see me on a podcast anytime soon, but I'm pretty sure with the insight that you've shared today that there's going to be definitely a few more people that are going to want to
Yes.
take you on their podcast. So look,
No, it's been fun.
I really appreciate your time and yeah, thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Cheers, Alex. Chat to you soon.